Hey everybody, Tom Henderson, the founder of RESGEN here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, integrating our faith into every area of our life, and ways that we as men can give life to others, at home, at work, and in the community. Joining me today is a friend of mine named Jon Acuff. Jon is a New York Times best-selling author of 7 books, but I'm guessing that number is soon to become 8 because his newest book, All It Takes Is a Goal, was just released in September, and I have no doubt that it too will hit that status. When not writing, Jon can be found hanging out with his wife and his 2 daughters, or on a stage as one of Inc.'s top 100 leadership speakers. Over the years, Jon has spoken to hundreds of thousands of people at conferences, colleges, and companies around the world, including FedEx, Nissan, Microsoft, Comedy Central, and RESGEN Men's Summit 2023. On today's show, Jon and I talk about goals and how setting, reaching for, and achieving them can help us live up to our full potential and help us steward the gifts that God has given us to a higher level. We also talk about the power of building a best moments list, how finding the right fuel can lead to greater goal achievement, and about things we can do that will help us blast through our comfort zones, whether those be in our business, in our relationships, or in our faith. This, my friends, is going to be a great episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jon Acuff. Brother, welcome to the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, dude. Looking forward to it.
Oh, man, this is so good. And it's so funny because from not knowing one another to now seeing each other basically 3 times within a very short window, it's like we go way back.
Yeah. I told a buddy the other day that I had a lunch and a dinner with friends in South Dakota. And he was like, you know 2 people in South Dakota? And I was like, yeah, that is 20% of the population. I've cornered. And he was right, because I usually don't get to see friends in cities I visit. I was like, yeah, it's weird that I have a network. And there's that other dude, that psychologist or counselor. I just endorsed his book.
Jason. Yeah,
so now I have a 3rd dude in South Dakota.
Yeah,
so
which is 60%. That's 60% of the population.
Pretty good squad in South Dakota.
Right, exactly. That's a pretty good research group too, by the way. I mean, because you're a big research guy, and to say that you can now talk to us and say that you've surveyed 60% of the South Dakota population.
Yeah, I've cornered that market.
Exactly.
I still haven't been to North Dakota, but dude, everybody in South Dakota, one thing y'all all consistently say is, you've already been to the better Dakota.
Yeah, for sure. You beat me to the punch. Don't
worry about it.
All right, so here's the deal. We're gonna get into a lot of great stuff here today. But before we do that, I would just love for you to just give a quick little introduction of yourself. I mean, I gave just a little bit of a preface as to.
Better have been glowing.
It was glowing almost as much as your face that just got off of vacation, which we're going to get to in a second. But so just a quick little intro of who you are, your family, and then we're going to dive in.
Yeah, my name is Jon Acuff. I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I've got 2 teenage daughters. I've been married for 22 plus years now. And my background is I was in corporate marketing for about 15 years, started blogging, fell in love with communicating online. I became a public speaker and built my own company about 10 years ago. So now I do 2 things. I write books, and then I go to talk to companies or large conferences about those books. So that's a pretty good summary.
Right. And I actually talked about a couple of the companies that you have been able to speak in front of. God, opened up just such great doors for you. But I am wondering, you've had a nice list of corporations, conferences, colleges, different things that you've spoken at. But I have to imagine that this year, the highlight for you has to have been RESGEN Men's Summit 2023. Am I right?
Yeah. When you look on your calendar, if there's something you want to see in February, it's South Dakota.
Yeah.
Like it is, like you want to go, oh, good. That's when, like, anyone I told anywhere in any state that I was going to South Dakota in February was like, what happened? Why did you?
Yeah.
And dude, that's the crazy thing about RESGEN is that, like, that there's 1,000 dudes in February at a men's conference is like amazing. So yeah, it ended up being a blast. It didn't snow while I was there. There's certainly a lot of snow around, but it ended up being just a blast. And that's where we first got to actually meet and then hang out since then.
I love it. And then you got to come back to our great state just about 3 months later where we got to see each other and you spoke at the SME conference. And then right from there, you were heading on a vacation, a pretty lengthy vacation with your family. And so I want to know, you and I are similar in that we're driven. We love production, right? We love like producing, and we love working. I mean, we love working and we love seeing what our work produces and kind of the impact we can have on people. So I'm just wondering, how does vacation work for you? Because I mean, a lot of our audience is, men. They want to produce, they want to be productive. They're go-getters. A lot of, like, you write books and speak a lot about just achieving more and being more and all of that. So sometimes when we're wired that way, it's tough to unplug. Sometimes it's right.
Yeah.
And so
I don't.
Tell me how that works. Like, because I think that maybe we can even learn a little bit about like, how does that, is it okay to be that way? Because sometimes like people are like, you need to rest.
No, well, I mean, so like 16 years ago, when I worked for Bose up in Massachusetts, the stereo company, I met a guy at a conference, and he said, and we were just talking, and I still have his business card, and he was like, yeah, I take July off and go to Cape Cod. And like, that was like, what? This human takes a whole month? Like, that sounds magic. Like, how do you even get a job where you can figure that out? And so it's always been something I wanted to do. But you're right. I love the work. I love what I do. I'm very driven. But for me, like the first 7 days, I was itchy. I was like I need to be emailing. I had to come down off it. But by like day 8, by day 9, I was reading books. I was hiking. I was running. And like, I talked to my counselor about it. He's like, you're still going to write. You're just going to write other stuff because writing is healthy for you. So I disagree when somebody goes, you need to completely turn off. Like, well, maybe they do. Like, that's their version. But like, you wouldn't, I sometimes tell the story of drinking a whole gallon of water a day for like 2 weeks as a test. And then I hated it. And I realized the person whose advice I was following weighed 225 pounds. It was a bodybuilder. Yeah. And I weigh 150. Our bodies probably need different amounts of water. Like, if he told me you got to wear a neck size of 800, I wouldn't be like, this is the shirt I have to wear. You just got to take people's advice. Like, so I think that when it comes to rest, it's the same thing. I think different people rest different ways. But so for me, what it looked like, I was still really creative. I just had I started a folder, a Google Doc called These Ideas Are Awesome. And I would just, as I read books, whether it was a Dallas Willard book or, a book I was curious, a Rick Rubin book, some book I was curious about, I would throw the ideas in that folder. And then when I got, I did that for 30 days. I had like 200 ideas. The other thing is I made myself really interruptible. Like, there was this one day where my wife was like, hey, I was on the golf cart and I saw this we were in the mountains. She was like, I saw this gigantic rock in a neighborhood. It's so weird. Like, let's go look at the rock. I was like, oh, let's go look at the rock. Like, I was super interruptible. I was super available. And so for me, that's what it looked like. And it was really peaceful, but it wasn't lethargic. Like, I still felt like I was using my talents. They were just in different ways.
Yeah.
I was enjoying different things. And so I think, I don't like the one size fits all for vacation any more than I like it one size fits all for water consumption and one size fits all for work. I'm a double shirt. I'm a double like the talent dude. Like, whether I got 5'2", I'm doubling that and I'm excited about it. But the lesson I've learned in the last month, God's really hit me on doing less. Like, how do I do less? And what that looks like, the line that just keeps coming back to me is, to do less requires trust in God. To do more requires trust in John. If I say I need to get more done, I got to really trust my abilities. If effort is what's going to carry the day, if I'm idolizing hustle, which I kind of lean into sometimes, I really have to trust me. If I go, God, you know the project, you know what's going on, I'm going to have an open hand with it. I'm going to do less, but that requires trust in God. Or I do more and it requires trust in John. And I've done the trust in John. It's exhausting. It's never ending. And so now I'm more of an attitude of like, let's see what he brings. Because the best things that have happened to me in life were received, not forced. So like, I'm now like, God, the book's coming out. I've got a book coming out in a couple weeks. Like, that's a great time to grind and go crazy. Or I can work to the best of my abilities and trust he's going to do so many other things that I then get to celebrate with him And I go, oh my gosh, that happened. Like my cup does runneth over. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like, so that's and I'm not, and maybe I'll write about it someday, but I'm fascinated by men that are able to have really successful careers, really successful platforms, still have wives that love them, still have kids that know them, still have a faith that's rich and deep. Like, I refuse to believe you have to choose one or the other.
Right.
I don't think, because like, here's the other thing. So I used to think if I got successful, I couldn't rest. Like, to be successful, you had to be a workaholic. You had to, I took a month off because I've been successful. The reason I was able to afford to take a month off was because I worked really hard and was really deliberate and like worked and like, and that led to more rest, not less. So I already know that lie is not true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not true that to do more means you become a workaholic. Like, I actually got more family time because I put in the effort. I'm like, oh, okay, well, cool. What other lies have I believed about money, about God, about effort, about creativity? So I'm 47, so there's still so much of this I'm figuring out, but it's fun to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. And man, there's so much good stuff in there that, we could probably make an entire podcast just about those couple statements that you just made before we even get into the new book. But one of the things that just kind of struck me is about this whole idea. We put our pressure on ourselves to unplug. And so I want to just go back to that for a quick second, to where then we feel guilty about not unplugging the right way, because then it's like we put pressure on ourselves in so many different ways to do so many different things. And we never even ask the question of, well, how do I feel rest? And then how do I also bring a presence and a spirit of rest to my family and to the most important relationships of my life? Because that's what you're able to do.
So here's an example of that. So like, now I'm learning about margin, which is such an overused word, but I think is a fine word. So like yesterday, I blocked off some thinking time. I'm trying to do more thinking, like where I'm like, okay, what am I thinking about this problem? I'm journaling. There's this book called The Road Less Stupid that talks about we don't think enough. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I had it on my calendar. We're recording on a Thursday. So it's Tuesday. I'm looking at my calendar the next day. I see 2-hour thinking time block from 8 to 10 a.m. Awesome. My oldest daughter, who's about to go to college, go back to college, texts me, is like, hey, we need to play pickleball again before I leave. I go, how about tomorrow at 8 a.m.? So yesterday on a Wednesday in the middle of the week, I've been gone for a month. Every other time I've gone on vacation, the next week is insane because I'm like, I got to catch up. The week after a month off, I was like, hey, let's go play pickleball at 8 a.m. on a weekday. Like that to me was like, oh, that's trusting God.
Yeah.
Pickleball on a weekday is trusting God. Okay, cool. And I had the space to do it because I wasn't so overscheduled. That's the other thing God's leaning on me is every possibility starts with people. Every opportunity starts with people.
Yep.
Like new opportunities always start with new people. So that's where like going to dinner with you, going to lunch with Adam Weber, like there would have been years and years and years I never would have done that. I would have just holed up in the hotel room and written. But I've got this real fresh conviction of like, no, I need to go connect with people. Like I need other dudes. Like I need, like, what does that look like? And fun stuff happens. And then the joke I sometimes do is I've never, at the end of a night of just holding up in my hotel room writing or scrolling Instagram or YouTube, whatever, I've never been like, so glad I didn't connect with people tonight and instead did Instagram for like an hour. That was good. That was the right decision.
That was very life-giving.
I feel fed. I feel fed from that. Like, no, I feel like, like I have reels all over me. Like, I don't like, that's not helpful. So yeah, so I have a kind of a fresh like view of that right now that's fairly new that I'm still just kind of experimenting with, but it feels a lot more fun than what I have been doing.
Right. And what I love about that is that, even though you don't talk a lot about your faith in the books that you have that most recently been putting out and all that kind of stuff, your faith is such a guiding principle with everything you do, with how you write, with how you speak, with how you connect with people, with how you lead your family. And it's so, you can't talk to you. And this is just kind of, just to encourage you for a second, you can't talk to you without recognizing your deep love for God and your deep love for people. And so, which is just fantastic, Jon. So,
thanks.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm interested, when did your relationship with the Lord become something that was like personal for you and really a lens that your faith being a lens that you look at life through?
I would say like early 30s, mid 30s.
Okay.
Like, I grew up in the church. My dad's a pastor. So like, I knew this stuff headwise, but I would say really like mid-30s, got connected to other men. But it's progressive. Like people sometimes will go like, did you have a eureka moment about God or an idea or whatever? And I always say like, no, I have like a flock of ahas, like aha moments, like a whole, like birds, like a flock of them. So like, you know, I run with my pastor, Kevin Queen, and another pastor named Justin, and another person at church. So I'm the only one in the running group that doesn't work at the church. And we run, and like that, I joined that like 3 years ago. We run and we pray. So we run like 3 miles, we pray at a church, and we run 2 miles back. And praying out loud with other dudes for half an hour, I'd never done that. Like that was bizarre to me. And that changed how I pray and changed how I understand prayer. But that was another progressive moment. It wasn't like in my early 30s, I had this lightning bolt and then I'll change. It was like progressively, because I always like, you know, a friend of mine talks about how God is gentle. Like he's a gentle God to teach you stuff at the pace you can do it. So like that was another like, oh, hey, let me show you what prayer can look like. Oh my gosh, it can look like that. Or, oh, let me show you what work can look like. Oh, it can work like that. Or like, let me show you what creativity can look like. Oh, it can look like that. Like it's progressively, but I would say like early 30s probably is where it started to get curious to me.
Yeah. And I love that you said that a lot of that has been fostered and continues to grow through your connection with other dudes. Because because God designed us for obviously relationship with him, but also relationship with other people. And we journey with other people as we're on this adventure called life. And so that is so phenomenal. And I love that you, have you tried praying while running? Or does that just then involve in like heavy breathing?
No, we'll tell stories. Like, and there's one guy who's younger and in the best shape, and so we try to get him talking because then he'll slow down. Like he'll lead the pack and they'll be like, "Ask Justin about prayer," because we're trying to slow his roll. Like he's very fast.
Yeah,
we're like,
okay, marathon guy, just relax.
This dude's killing us. He's like a boxing trainer. Like he's just very much in shape, and the rest of us are like suburban dads.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I want to talk about the new book. Okay. So in the intro, I talked about how, you know, you've written 7 New York Times bestsellers, and it's soon to be number 8 because, you know, this one just released. I know it's going to hit that mark. There's so much great content in here, and I try to pull some different things out of it that just were meaningful to me. But let's first talk about why you wrote this book and the research that was done by yourself and someone that if they've read your books, they're familiar with his name, Dr. Mike Peasley, that really just started with a simple question. The simple question was, what was that question?
Well, the thing, I mean, before the question before that was, I felt like I had wasted my potential. So for me, every good book starts, for me, the way I like to write books is I find a challenge I'm facing, I work on it, and then I ask other people have this challenge too. And if they have it too, then I go, okay, I'm really going to work on it. And then I share it from there. So we were at the college I attended, Sanford University in Birmingham, Alabama. It was me, my wife, and my oldest daughter, and she was doing a college tour. And I just had this overwhelming sense of like, what a waste college was for me. Like it was a waste, so much potential wasted. And my wife was like, college was amazing. And I was having the opposite experience. So as I drove home to Nashville, I was kind of stuck on, I can either choose to regret, like I'm going to sit in this regret and like this is going to be terrible, or what could I do differently going forward? Could I tap into my potential going forward? Could I live in my potential zone, not just as a visitor, but as a full-time resident? Like, what would that look like? And then I said, okay, do other people feel like they're not living up to their potential? And that's where Dr. Mike Peasley got involved. We did a survey with 3,000 people. 96% said they weren't living up to their potential. 50% of them said 50% of themselves was untapped, which the metaphor I use is that's like only opening half your Christmas presents every year. And you think about the dudes that are listening to this right now that are only opening 10% of their presents or 20%. Like that's why life is challenging and frustrating when you know there's more to you than you're currently living out of. And so that's what kind of started the project, was like, okay, how do I make potential a plan, something that I actually do, versus this fuzzy topic that I don't know how to connect with, that I don't know how to operate? Like my books, I always write with this attitude of, what do I do with that on a Tuesday? Okay, but what do I do with that on a Tuesday? Because you'll read some books sometimes, they're like, you should just change your attitude. And you're like, agreed. What do I do with it? Like, how do I live that on a Tuesday? Like, or they'll go, you should have an abundance mindset. I agree. Like, how do I do that on a Tuesday? And they go, you'll just know.
Yeah.
You'll know in your heart. And you're like, that's not helpful. And so that's really what started the book for me, was my own sense of feeling like I was missing my potential and my own desire to live forward into it.
Okay. And I think that that's something that I think as Christian dudes, sometimes we can even, because we ask the question of, well, like, am I being who God wants me to be? Am I fully experiencing, who God created me to be? And we put this, again, we talked about pressure a little bit ago, but this pressure on ourselves that can really cause us a great deal of discouragement and emptiness and going like, well, how do I live to my potential? And so it's a weight that I think we can carry. So I love that we're tackling it, but I think it's, so what do you mean by potential? Because, I mean, there's a word right there that everybody kind of maybe defines a little bit differently. But if you say, like, the question that you're thinking about as, okay, am I, Jon Acuff, living up to my potential? What does that word mean?
Yeah, so I define potential as the gap between your vision and your reality. So the vision you have for your life and the current reality. And you go, whoa, I think I'm capable of this. Whoa, I want to do this. And wow, my reality is right here. And you can either go, oh, they're so apart, I failed, whatever. Or you can go, whoa, look how much potential I have to play with. Like, look at all this space. Look at all this room. I'm going to work to close that gap. I'm going to bring those two things, my vision of how life could be and my reality, closer, closer, and closer, and closer till they overlap. And you go, the thing I've always wanted to do, I'm doing that with and it doesn't start all at once. It's like a little bit more today. Like, wow, I did a little bit more today. Oh, what did that look like? I worked on that a little bit more today. Like, I could see potential moments in my day. And I could sense that I was in that spot. And what happens is you get a little of that, and then you naturally want more. Like, you go, okay, I want to do more of that. And it's the same with God, like, where you have an amazing church service on a Sunday morning, and you go, I want more of that in the other 6 days. Like, I can't hold my breath. Like, I can't just go, and when I leave the building, I hope the next 6 days, I hope it's enough. Like, no, I want more of that. I'm going to deliberately find ways. I'm going to do a Wednesday night service. I'm going to join a men's group. I'm going to go to whatever it is, so that I can add more of that in the rest of my week. That's the same thing for potential for me, is going, okay, wow, I found this thing. I have this sense of what I want to do. I'm going to find ways to do more of it. And I'm going to pay attention. You have to have self-awareness. Potential always takes self-awareness. I always say, like, you can't accomplish any goal in your life without self-awareness. And the example I use is, like, the man who gets fired for anger issues is so confused because he thinks he's passionate. He goes, oh, no, that's just passion. They're like, no, everybody doesn't trust you because you're so angry. Like, no self-awareness. The person whose doctor says, unless you lose 50 pounds, you're going to have serious health issues, is like, what are you even talking about right now? Like, there's no self-awareness. The guy who dates terrible women, 15 women in a row, and is like, it's so weird, I attract losers. Like, no, it's you. Like, no self-awareness. But when you have a little bit of self-awareness, you can start to go, these are the things that I'm called and created to do. Okay, how do I lean into those? What does that look like? How do I be present to those? And how do I do more of that? Like, the example I sometimes use, Tom, when I lived in Atlanta, I didn't start getting up at 5 a.m. because I decided to have grit or discipline or willpower. Like, none of those things have ever served me that well. I got up at 5 a.m. because I started blogging on the side of my day job and realized, man, this is pretty fun. Like, I kind of like this. Like, this is kind of cool. And I had this little bit of window where God was like, hey, here's some potential. And I was like, I want to do more of that. And suddenly TV was dumb. I didn't decide to stop liking TV. I was like, screw TV. Like, this thing is deep joy. Like, I got deep joy in this writing thing. I'm going to steal hours from other parts of my life and throw them at this thing. Let's go. That's, to me, how potential works.
Right. And but the thing you got to be willing to do is, of course, leave the comfort of the TV, what we've always known. And I love what you talked about. I'm not sure if you mentioned at the summit, but I know you did at the SME event. Just when you were in town for the second time in a year in Sioux Falls, a place you'd never been, but you came back because you loved it so much. But you talked about how when you want something more outside of the comfort zone, or something than what you currently have within the comfort zone. And that's what really compelled you to say, man, I don't need to be spending 8 hours on Netflix a week or whatever it is. It's probably way more that people spend on Netflix than that, probably, but
Well, it's so the thing there is you never leave the comfort zone just because. Why would you? It's comfortable.
Right.
Like that's it. It's in the name. And so you leave it because what's on the outside is better than what's on the inside. And you go, okay, I want this thing. I'm willing to work for this thing. And that's where, again, like from a God perspective, you talk about like open the eyes of my heart, like show me the thing, like give me that sense, like, Lord, like you're my shepherd, I shall not want. Like, show me what still waters look like. Show me that so that I can sprint toward that. Show me what that looks like. So for me, that's such a big part of it. I mean, when you consider, like, part of this is, do you believe we have a good God? Like, is he good? Like, if he's good, then you go, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean he likes to give me good things? Like, I always love this helps me kind of think about God. When my daughter, jumping back to her texting me, she texts me and says, Dad, I'd love to play pickleball with you. There's not a dad on the planet that when a kid goes, I would like to spend time with you, goes, no. Like, we're thrilled. Like, when a teenager, especially a teenager, shows initiative and goes, hey, I would like to see you, we clear anything we can out of the way. And we're human. Like, imagine God. Imagine God when you go, hey, I got this thing. Like, can you help me with this? Like, will you, like, he's a billion times more generous with a billion times more resources. So I go like, man, I would love to figure out what my potential is. And like, he doesn't go, well, let's you work really hard first. Like he goes, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Go, let's go. And so I think that's what we have to remember is that if he's a generous God, which he is, if he's the creator of all space and time, which he is, and you go, hey, I'd love to know more about me and I'm going to learn that in you. He goes, great.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's do it. And it gets really fun.
Well, and that whole idea of, do I believe that he's wired me with certain gifts, a personality, all these types of joys, things that give me a joy, which I know is part of why that you think one of the first steps in really understanding the potential that you can reach comes from, you talk about it pretty close to as you get into the book, is this whole idea of a best moments list, where you begin to think about just the things that you've enjoyed in the best moments of your life, and recognizing that God has wired you a certain way. And then within those best moments, it really breaks down to 4 different categories, which I thought was super helpful, by the way, because you've learned more about yourself through looking and evaluating your best moments list and saying, yeah, so this is kind of maybe this percentage of those moments are based upon accomplishments, or the 4 categories you talk about being accomplishments, experiences, relationships, and objects. And mine was, my best moments list is continually growing. That was something that I just started because I read the book. And mine tend to be a little bit more towards on the relationship side, just because I'm a relationship person. Like totally. When I go to towns to speak, I'm looking ahead going, okay, if I don't know anybody, who can I meet and have dinner with?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the power of the best moments list and why you think that's such an integral part in unleashing and unlocking our potential.
Well, I didn't even really think about it as being counterintuitive when I initially did it. And again, it was something I did in my own life. I'm in the Augusta airport. I'm feeling like, okay, I want to explore potential. And so I wrote best moments on a piece of paper and I just started listing them. And they were big ones and small ones. It was, when my kids asked to spend time with me, that's a best moment. My favorite sushi restaurant, that's a best moment. New York Times bestsellers list, that's a best moment. So I just started coming up with them. I gave, like, the one rule is that it all counts. You fire the bouncer. There's nothing you go, I don't know if that got, no, there's no bouncer. It all counts. And why it's counterintuitive is that we as a culture are addicted to sadness and trauma. We're addicted to those 2 things. So I realized almost every counseling situation I've been in starts with, we're going to go through all your worst trauma. We're going to talk about all your sadness. Every couple small group I'm in, when we tell our stories, it inevitably breaks down to, here's our worst moments as a married couple over the last 5 years. Everybody's crying. It takes forever. And then I started to see statistics like this. For every 100 scientific papers on sadness, there's only 1 on joy. Like, for every 100 scientific journal-based papers on sadness, there's 1 on joy.
Wow.
So I wanted to flip it and go, what if there's something we can learn from joy? Like, what if I can do that? And so it becomes this really powerful moment where it teaches you gratitude. you automatically become more grateful because you're remembering things you'd forgotten that you love. Teach you that self-awareness, because if you tell your head and your heart, hey, think about things that we loved in the past, they instinctually go, well, let's look for them in the present too. Let's see if some are happening in the moment. It makes you present. Like, the way I define being present is it's being nostalgic about a moment you're still in. Not later, not a year later, not a month later, not a week later. As you're in the moment, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
there's sweetness here. Like, there's joy here. And so it becomes this really simple, really fun tool. And I did it with hundreds of people before I put it in the book to test it. And everybody had the same response. It was a sense of, wow, I didn't know that about me. I like to joke that it's the world's only honest personality test, because in every personality test I've ever taken, some degree of should slips in. Or I'm like, I should care more about this. I should be a better leader. I should be, and you fill it out and you're like, yeah, I mean, my honest answer is different, but I know we're going to talk about this Enneagram thing in a small group. So I better say, at the end of the day, I just love people, even if you're an introvert. And so it just became this really honest personality test. And then the 4 categories jumped out of it screaming, where every moment fit into it. And then again, this flip happens where you go, I want more of that. So if relationships are what matters, I'm going to go build more of those. The one that got me was, it gave me permission to love accomplishments. So I had some evangelical shame about success. Our understanding of success in the church is so busted. It's so broken in so many different ways. And there's people that have a healthy view of it. I just think there's a lot of unhealthy views of it. And so when I made a huge list of like almost 200 points, and the biggest category was accomplishments, it made me go, okay, wow, maybe God built me that way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a mistake. And maybe that's, but the funny thing I think about sometimes is when people say stuff like this time, where they'll go, like, I've said this out myself. People go, do you love Nashville? You love living in Nashville? I go, I can't see us moving. We love it here. I mean, unless God called us somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's such a subtly terrible thing to say, because what I'm saying is, I love this place unless God moves me somewhere I hate. Like, unless God, who is a terrible God, and goes, man, John's so enjoying Nashville.
So happy there.
Let's ruin that. Like, what? Like, or like when people go like, I hope God doesn't call me to the mission field. He's not gonna. Like, that's kind of like saying, I'm terrible at math. I hope God doesn't make me a calculus teacher. He's not going to. Like, why would he do? Like, what a torturous God that you go, yeah, I love Sioux Falls unless God calls us somewhere else. Like, oh, so like there's a threat just looming over your head that like at some point God's gonna be like, I want you to do something terrible that you'd hate, that'd be terrible for you. Like, that's a monster of a God. So for me, it gave me permission to go like, nah, I'm built for accomplishment. And then the other one, like objects, was the smallest one on my list. And I was like, oh, objects don't really motivate me. And what's funny is the entire marketing world is based on getting you excited about objects. And so you go, oh, but I'm not. Like, okay, well then I need to motivate myself in different ways. Like the object, like it's not my motivation. All right, cool. Let me find something else. So yeah, the best moments list was really fast, and to watch people do it, because I'll always go, come up with 30, and they end up coming up with 300. And so it's like a joy explosion. And so if anybody does that activity, they come back and they're like, what? Like,
yeah.
It's so simple and it's so practical. So yeah, I had a fun time shepherding that idea.
Yeah.
And the best ideas I have, I just go, oh man, I got to shepherd that one. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that it's a different way to look at past events, because you're right. A lot of times, we're told, look, we don't need to look in the rearview mirror. We need to
you say ignore it. You're not going that way.
We need to look in the windshield because it's so large and the rearview mirror is so small. So why waste time looking in the rearview mirror? Let's look at the grandiose stuff that's ahead of us, which is, okay, yes, it is much larger. But oftentimes you're right. When we look in the past, it's okay, what are the negative things that we focus on? But the best moments list helps you say, let's look at the past. Let's look in the rearview mirror and say, what are those highlights? What's the highlight reel in that, in our past, that can really help us understand more about who we are, how we're wired, so that then we can move forward and, like you said, experience more of that. And the reality is that as we do that, we experience more joy and we're even more productive, because when we are experiencing joy, production just naturally follows.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you'll work harder at stuff you love. Like that's just the reality of it. Like you'll do, like the reason I've written so many books is like I've plugged into the joy of that. And I'm like, oh, that, like, man, you don't have to force me to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, like speaking, like you and I guarantee we could geek out. And we did this. Like when we talked at dinner, we talked about like speaking and trips and like techniques and jokes. And like, dude, nobody made us and said, hey, you're two speakers, you're road dogs. Like you have to talk about this. You have to, like, nobody made us do that. We couldn't help but be like, oh, have you ever tried this? Or, oh, did you ever go to this venue? What did this, like, because it was joyful. And so for me, I think when you tap into that, it does change a lot in your life.
Well, and those things, again, they help you remember of why you want to leave your comfort zone. Because then it's like you said, it is much more comfortable. And I think about even that comfort zone. I want to just go back to that a second, because a lot of times we think about that in regards to our production or our business. But the same applies in our relationships with God, of course, but our relationships with our wives, our relationships with our kids. And are we willing to leave the comfort zone of what is for what could be as we're trying to grow deeper in our marriage, grow deeper in our relationships with kids? And what's on the outside of what maybe comes natural, or like, well, you know what, it's not comfortable for me to say I love you to my wife. You know, I didn't grow up that way. But you know what? The discomfort of saying that really feeds her spirit and grows our marriage. So I want to leave my comfort zone to do that. So that's
the payoff is huge.
Oh,
the payoff's huge.
It's like, so transferable to our relationships at the office, all of that.
Huge. Well, and the thing is, most people have goals of some degree for every part of their life except relationships. So like I asked 1,000 people what their goals were recently, and I would say 97% were not relationship. Mm-hmm. Like they had 1 million. So I think we tend to think relationships develop organically and on their own. And like we'll have meetings and plans and KPIs and all this stuff for like our business. We'll have health plans, all this stuff. And then we kind of hope we have a strong marriage just because. But that's, I heard somebody say, like, he was talking about passive income. He said, I don't like the phrase passive income because there's no such thing as passive health. Like nobody is in shape passively. And he said, and the same is true of marriage. There's no such thing as a passive good marriage. And I was like, that's a great way to kind of frame it. And so that's how, yeah. But it feels weird. People feel weird having a goal for a relationship. It feels like the pushback I'll get from dudes is like, that's inauthentic. If I have to write down stuff and remind myself that's inauthentic. And I'm always like, yeah, tell your wife you forgot her birthday because you're trying to be authentic. You felt like if you had a note in your phone, that would be inauthentic. So you forgot her birthday. Let me know. Like, no, dude, like every dude listening, if you want to crush like present buying, that's not an easy thing for me. All you have to do is start a Google Doc, a note in your phone, whatever. And as they mention something, put it in that note.
100%.
November, pull up that note. And instead of trying to guess, like, she likes like watches, right? And like shoes, like, what is she? Oh, does she like the color red? Like, you'll have 15 things in there. And dude, when you buy her something she mentioned in February, in December, like I just did that the other day. Like, my wife mentioned that she wanted this, I guess it's a thermometer for like cooking. It's ThermoWorks. It's some sort of red pen special thermometer. Okay. She mentioned it. I put it in a note. It got to my house today because her birthday is in a couple weeks. Like she's going to go, oh, you remember it. And it wasn't that I said, okay, head, good luck. I was like, oh, if this was a boss or somebody I cared about in a work setting, I'd put it in my phone. So why wouldn't I put that in my phone for my spouse? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm going to have 1 million coworkers. I'm going to have one wife. Why don't I take notes on her, not just every other part of my life?
Yeah, that's good. I often, when Laura mentions stuff, I just automatically go to Amazon and I put it in my cart and then hit save for later, just so that I build all those. And I have about 50 items in my cart. And I'll be like, okay, what's my budget come time for a birthday? And I'm like, hey, I can't afford it all, but which one did she like the most or whatever? But so that's one of the tools that I use is I love the Amazon save for later cart. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about just goals here, because I know we're going to have to wrap up our time here shortly. So let's talk about just the different 3 goals that you mentioned and the power of like the easy, middle, and guaranteed goals, and how you define those and why achieving easy goals will help you as you continue to move forward. as you...
Well, so just think about a ladder. Like if there was a ladder in your life and it was, let's say 12 feet high, 12-foot tall ladder, and it only had 2 rungs, one at the very bottom and one at the very top. That would be a useless ladder. But that's how most people approach goals. So they see this ladder and they go, I want to run a marathon, or I want to build a business, or and I heard that I'm supposed to go hard or go home. Like if your dream doesn't scare you, it's not big enough. So then they try to jump as high as they can, grab the 12-foot rung, and pull themselves up to it. That's a very difficult way to experience a ladder. Or imagine a ladder with 20 different rungs, and they were a foot apart, or they were 6 inches apart, or they were 8 inches, whatever. And I said, can you get to the top of that ladder? You're like, yeah, totally. You would climb that ladder step by step and be like, that really wasn't that hard. That's the same with our goals. So what you have to think about is, okay, instead of saying, here's this really crazy aggressive thing I want to try, great, have that. Know the top rung. I think you should have the top rung. Like, no, okay, like I want to write a book. I want to start a business. I want to lose 50 pounds, whatever. But then go back to the bottom of the ladder and go, okay, how can I make this easy so that I actually continue to climb it? How can I put my pride aside, put my ego aside, put my expectations of how fast it's going to be aside, and create some easy things I actually do along the way and make them finish lines. So an example of that. So today I wrote about 1,000 words on a new book I'm working on. Imagine if the only finish line I had was finish the whole book. Like that would be the worst year for me because every day I would fail. Every single day that I didn't finish the book, I would fail because I'd only get to succeed one day, the very last day when I finished the whole book. So instead, I have this ladder with a lot of different rungs. And some days the rung is super small. It just says 50 words, the title, the subtitle, 1,000 words, 250 words, whatever. Every day I'm climbing, every day I'm succeeding. I get to the top of the ladder and I go, wow, I got a whole book.
Yeah.
Like, look at this book. And so for me, I didn't write a book until I was 34. I'll turn in my 10th in about a month since. So how did it happen? Because there's a goal ladder. And when you climb it, it's a lot easier to really accomplish some fun things.
No, that's good. So let's talk about that in parenting then, because how is that transferable in our parenting? Because one of the things that we want to do with our kids is help them understand how to set and reach goals in their life that aren't daunting for them and that they're fun. Because I imagine that it's a lot more fun when you accomplish, hey, I wrote 500 words and by the way, that spoke to me because I'm currently writing a book. And I feel like, man, I don't think I wrote enough today. I don't feel like I didn't have time. I lost a bunch of productivity time because of this happening or whatever. But are there some things that you've done with your girls specifically that have been helpful or that you've seen along the way?
Well, the first thing for parenting when it comes to kids and goals, and I saw this happen with a buddy the other day. He said, John, I'm so frustrated. My 16-year-old, he's just a mess. He's not disciplined. He's all over the place. And I said, well, how old are you when you kind of got it together? Like when you kind of got it to your own? He said, I was 33. And I said, no offense. Like maybe your parenting is so amazing, it'll cut a year off that and only take him 16 years to achieve what you did in 33 years. So 32 versus 33, but give him time. So often as parents, we experience something at mid-30s, mid-40s, we go, and we're desperate out of love for our kids to experience the same things, but they're 16. And it took us till 41 to get that. And we're like, I could shave off 25 years if I just say it the right way. Like, I could just teach that out of them real quick. Like, no, dude, no. Like, so part of it, I always give that warning, like, give them some space, give them some time. And then the other thing is, like, play to their strengths, not yours. So that's the other thing is you can't bring what you're good at and try to force that on them. So anybody who's had more than one kid knows kids come to the planet wired differently. So it's kind of like if you have a kid who's an introvert and you go, you're in trouble, you have to go to your room all by yourself. They're like, oh no, how terrible. If you have a kid who's an extrovert and you go, you're grounded, you don't get to see your friends. That's a big deal. And so I think part of it is going, how's my kid motivated? How are they wired? What are they excited about? What are they into? And that's part of what's fun about doing this book. We've actually got a teen version of it coming out next fall. That my 2 teenage daughters ended up writing, because if you can figure out these principles now, you save so much time. Like I I always tease my kids, like the bar for crushing is so low right now because so few people try, like the quiet quitting movement. I'm like, oh, you guys are gonna crush. You just have to do a little above. You don't even have to do, like back in the 50s, you had to do double above to get noticed. Now, if everybody else is doing the bare minimum, eat just the minimum.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Just showing up for work. Just show up.
Yeah. I'm in the office. Like, look at me. Like, I'm shaking hands. Like, I think if you can figure out some of that out as a teenager, but yeah, play to their strengths, find something they're passionate about, and give them time for them to own it versus trying to force it.
And that really speaks to, again, the kind of fuel that you're putting into their tank.
Yep.
And so we need to think about that even for ourselves is, what is the fuel that goes into our tank? If, my wife's vehicle, it runs better, shouldn't have a luxury vehicle by any means, but her vehicle runs better with premium fuel. It can run okay on regular,
sure,
but premium is what it will make it run better. So we want to put in the correct fuel. Well,
I've seen your wife's car. It's a Porsche.
Yeah,
his wife has a Porsche.
It's an Acura, but so at any rate, but that's the same for us. And I want to end with this kind of this idea of how do you find the right fuel? Like, is that part of just what comes out of the best moments list? How do we find the right
best moments list will tell you. So if you know, like if the majority of your items were relationship, then you're a community person and that's your fuel. Like if the majority of your items were, objects, then objects tell stories. That's why we like objects. Like no one that has an object on their list goes just because. They go, oh, actually that was a grandfather clock that was in my grandmother's house for 50 years and now it's in my house. And every time I see it, or, oh, that thing, a friend of mine, she bought herself a Louis Vuitton purse because growing up as a kid in Indiana without much money, she said, someday I'm going to be able to buy my own purse. And it took her decades and she did it. So that's not a purse. Like that's a story of I made this goal, I accomplished this goal. So really you just look at your best moments list and go, okay, which of these 4 categories line up? Like if, say, okay, accomplishment, then impact is going to be your fuel. Like you're inspired by impact. Like I have to impact the situation, this community. So it really just lines up with what your best moments list tells you about. And it's not, there's 4 fuels that we talk about in the book. And so, yeah, and then you just kind of lean into those. And if you're a leader, you've seen that go poorly with somebody who reported to you. Like one of the hardest days as a leader is when you try to motivate somebody with the wrong form of motivation. So let's say that you have somebody who's not consequence motivated. They're not motivated by a consequence. You go, hey, we love you, but unless you change some things, like we're going to have a tough moment. We might have to get rid of you. If they're not consequence motivated, it goes right over their head. Even on the day they've been fired, you're like, pretty good day. And you're like, no, it's terrible. Same with object. If you have somebody who's not object motivated, when you give them objects, they don't care.
Right.
So like I worked with a woman at Auto Trader and they gave us an orange iPod Shuffle. And she was like, ugh, I hate the color. And I was like, she's so entitled. And she wasn't entitled. She just wasn't object motivated. They could have given her 1,000 iPod Shuffles. She would have been like, oh, it's dumb. So a lot of it is finding the right fuel for you, for the people you lead, and then leaning into that and moving and moving them forward.
Yeah, that's good, Jon. Well, okay, brother. I know that this has been fast and furious, and time goes so fast in conversations like this. So thank you for your time. Before we end our time together, I'd love for you just to tell people how they can find more about you, where they can get the book, all of that, and then I have one final question that we'll end our time with.
Yeah. So I'm jonacuff.com. So you can just Google that, JONACUFF.com. The book is available anywhere books are sold. I read the audiobook, which is super fun. We added 10 bonus chapters to the audiobook. So that's a good time. And then I have a podcast called All It Takes Is a Goal, where I interview people about the goals they're working on.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, so we end our time here on the RESGEN Giving Life podcast with something that we call the final word. Okay, just so it's 30 to 60 seconds of anything that you just want to leave our people with. Well, you dropped so much wisdom on us, but I'd love for you to just have a Jon Acuff final word for the podcast here today. So what is your final word for us today?
Yeah, so I would say what if the gospel and evangelism looked like the prodigal son story, but the element of it that I love is that the older brother didn't come in from the field until the party was too loud. Like, what if we were having so much fun, living with so much joy that other people couldn't help but ask questions? And very rarely do Christians get accused of having so much fun and living with so much joy and being so funny that they get asked questions. And so what if that's what God looked like? What if God was throwing a party and it was so loud and so raucous, other people couldn't help but ask questions? That's how I'm trying to live my life.
I love it. I love it. Well, brother, I appreciate your friendship. I'm so grateful for your time in Sioux Falls this year and your time with me on the podcast. I know that people are going to get a lot of our time here together.
I'll see you when I come back.
Okay.
I visit Sioux Falls. I visited Sioux Falls, I think 0 times the first 44 years of my life and 3 times in the last 3 years. So
yeah, I love it.
We'll see.
All right, we'll see in a few months, I'm sure.
Slide in those DMs, by the way. North Dakota, where are you at? Where are you at?
All right, brother. Hey, blessings on the rest of your year.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Jon. Thanks for listening in to my conversation with Jon Acuff today. If you enjoyed it, please share it with others that you think may enjoy it as well. If you'd like to connect more with Jon, you can do so at jonacuff.me. And don't forget to also pick up a copy of his new book, All It Takes Is a Goal, wherever books are sold. All right, that's all for today. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time on another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others. We'll see you soon.